And when we whoop enough ass, everybody gonna get in line and do right.
All right, peace and blessings, assalamu alaikum, shalom. Welcome, everyone. We are back. Our title today that we're discussing, Born into the Crosshairs, Yummy in the Architect of Violence. And we're back with Doc. Peace and blessings, Doc. How you doing?
I'm great, brother. I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. So I want to share what we're using as the image and just briefly go over that, and then we'll get straight into the program.
All right.
All right, so as we can see, this is the image that we're using for the title for the program today, Born into the Crosshairs, Yummy in the Architecture of Violence. You see the dilapidated buildings and urban decay. These represents poverty, neglect, and the lack of investment in a community. Broken windows, crumbling facades, and abandoned structures signify a breakdown of social order, a lack of resources, and a pervasive sense of hopelessness for residents, including children. Graffiti and gang tags. The widespread graffiti, especially when interpreted as gang tags, symbolizes the pervasive presence of gang culture and illicit activity. It makes territory, normalizes violence, and indicates that children in this environment are constantly exposed to and potentially drawn into dangerous groups for protection or belonging. Garbage and debris. The trash-strewed streets underscores economic despair and lack of sanitation, but also a broader sense of disorder and abandonment. It suggests a community where basic needs are unmet and there's a lack of care from both residents and external systems. Cracked pavements. This represents the broken foundation, the instability, and fragile life in such environment. It symbolizes the fractured structures and the lack of solid, safe ground for children to grow on. The child's isolated toy, though small, is a powerful symbol. Its isolation and decayed surroundings. The toy is a poignant reminder that children do exist and try to play in these environments, but the grim reality overshadows their play. Its abandonment might suggest children are forced to grow up fast, leaving their childhood behind. The subtle drug paraphernalia, overturned bottles, points to substance abuse in the community, often linked to parental or family issues. Children exposed to drug abuse witness instability, neglect, and potential criminal activity, all of which are deeply traumatizing and can normalize destructive behavior. The overcast, muted sky. The absence of bright sunlight and the sober color panel talks about the bleakness and despair and limited opportunities. So this is the environment where a lot of our children grow up in. And today we're going to be talking about our children that are born into these crosshairs, and then the violence that comes from this, and also get into how do we fix this problem. Starting out, Doc, before we go into the quick video of Yummy, what's your thoughts on it? Do you think that this picture is an accurate portrayal of what the environment our children live in? Not all, but some do, or I would say maybe don't know if I want to say the majority of our children come from this type of environment, but I will say a significant number do come from this type of environment that creates more children like Yummy. What's your thought on that, Doc?
I would use the word many of our children come from these types of environments. Is it fairly representative of some Black experiences? Certainly. But listening to you talk, it reminds me of something that Andrew Hacker said when he was talking about the growing economic disparities between Black and white America. He said that there are two Americas, one Black, one white, separate and unequal. I think that in 2025, we can sort of extrapolate that and say that we've reached a point where, although racial identity, your appearance ties you together,
Mm-hmm.
there are multiple Black Americas that are going on right now. And many Black folk do not recognize this Black America. It's as foreign to them as something that is going on in Iran, Israel, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Ghana. We have no understanding of it. There's no real reference point for it. And that has been one of the great weaknesses, sort of a cultural disjunction that has occurred amongst our people, because now we have several generations of young Black folk, especially those whose parents were able to benefit from the late 1960s efforts to integrate PWIs, to integrate white businesses and what have you. We have several generations of Black children who are now Black adults who have no connection whatsoever to these environs. They have no connection whatsoever to their cousins who are being raised in these environs. So I think that our discussion has to be very careful and avoid this idea that this is a comprehensive view of what Black America is like, because it isn't. There are just so many different running experiences, Black experiences. We've had these discussions for decades now about what is authentically Black. And we're now at that point where, and I think we've been at this point since probably the 2000s, where are people who don't recognize this experience, who don't understand this, don't recognize it, don't see themselves in it, and therefore oftentimes have no sympathy for this experience. They're left out of this discussion. And in many ways, their experience of Blackness is being muted because people are so overzealously.
Doc, I think the last thing we heard was overzealously.
Them Black, many of them media wise, who are, for all intents and purposes, trying to make this the only Black experience. This the only Black experience.
Oh,
This the only Black experience. What is
okay, Doc.
happening here?
Say that again.
I said we have some entities who are trying to make this the only Black experience, and those entities are not always Black. You have to remember one of the things for me, and I'm going to try and shut down one StreamYard entry point. Hopefully, you can hear me better now,
Mm-hmm.
and there isn't a distortion. But one of the things that we rarely talk about, and I deal with this on a regular basis, and it is quite simply that many of our children, because I work on an HBCU campus,
Mm-hmm.
and I see many Black children seemingly reinvent themselves over that summer of their high school graduation to arriving on my campus.
Mm-hmm.
And you would swear that they are OG, triple OG, thugged out OG, because they come there perpetrating a fraud and trying to live up to what somewhere along the way they have garnered an understanding of what blackness is. And to be accepted by their peer group, they go ahead and behave as if they're from these environs, as if they're from South Side of Chicago, as if they're from certain parts of Memphis, Tennessee, the Fifth Ward of Houston, Texas. So
Mm-hmm.
these are images that are perpetrated not always by our people,
Mm-hmm.
but our people are consuming these same images as those who grow and develop a extreme dislike for us. And I yield, brother.
So those that you're talking about, you're saying that they are trying to act like they're from the places like we're looking in this picture. They're not from there. They're from, nice middle class environments, but want to act like they're from this picture.
Most certainly. I had a young man who actually had me for a summer class. And for one reason or another, I don't even remember all the particulars of it, he ended up having to drop the class because of financial reasons or what have you. And he was from a portion of Houston, Texas. And I'll give you the name and you tell me how many gangsters you think are emanating from there. He's from Katy.
Katy.
Thank you, Katy. I mean, you really think about the name Katy. You're from Katy, but you would have thought that he was O-Dog. Okay. And it became a running joke between me and him. He would show up with a do-rag on. He showed up sometimes with a red. Some days it was a red flag. Other times it was a blue flag hanging from the back. And it's all physical adornments that he's trying to fit into what he's developed as his understanding of what blackness actually is. Mm-hmm. And when he was nice enough that when it became clear that he was going to have to drop my course, he sent me a really nice card. He slid it under my door. And he thanked me for being the best professor he ever had. And he wished that he could have stayed. And he promised that he would take my class before he matriculated from the university. Mm-hmm. And he finished it with P.S. It goes down in Katy, Doc. And if I ever see you in the streets of Katy, it's on site. All right. And so you get a lot of that. I think that we forget that many of these young people are 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. And they're actually as susceptible to peer pressure as anybody else. Mm. And when you're looking at, not only just because I try to avoid generational warfare to the best of my ability, but when you're looking at some of the things that we've seen for maybe the past 4 or 5 generations of Black folk, you're seeing people trying to model their lives and their presentations into what they consider to be the most authentically Black presentation that they could. And, one of the things that when I lecture about the influence of popular culture upon the Black mind, I ask people this question, and I'm going to ask you in the audience this question. The audience can feel free to chime in, to put their answers in the chat. Menace to society. I want you to think about the character Cain. What kind of car did Cain drive?
Was it a Mustang?
Exactly. It was a green Ford Mustang 5.0, sitting on what? What kind of wheels?
Was it 20?
Sitting on Dayton's. Mm. Okay. And what song did Kane play all summer for the entire movie? What was he playing? Roger Troutman and Zapp's Computer Love.
Okay.
Now, the reason that I know that is there was a brother in my neighborhood who went and purchased the same exact car, green 5.0 Mustang sitting on Dayton's, and he played Computer Love all summer long. So in many ways, when we're looking at the portrayal of the Black identity, many of our children are behaving as if, they call it tabula rasa, as if they are blank slates. And these blank slates are being written on by these very weird and often irreconcilable constructs of what culture is. And so when you're talking about this picture that we have here, one of the questions that I would have to ask is quite simply, if the greatest art depicts life, I think that what we've been seeing for maybe the last 30, 40 years is actually life trying to depict art. But unfortunately, much of the art that's put out there, and I don't care if you're talking about Menace to Society, Boys in the Hood. I had a homeboy who had just seen Boys in the Hood, went out and got a pacifier and sucked on that pacifier all summer long.
Wow.
I don't care if you're talking about the Black Mafia family films that are on, the 50 Cent series, from Howard or what have you. Black folk are no different than white Americans in that regard. They love their gangsters. Okay, they love a good gang story. They love, it's riveting, it's interesting, it's exciting to them. But what happens to young, impressionable Black folk who know very little about being Black? What happens to their minds when you begin to talk about these are the principal building blocks upon how they get inclusion into not only the culture, but oftentimes into their families? What is the price, as James Baldwin would put it, what is the price of that ticket? And I yield, brother.
Awesome. And that brings me up because I remember my one of my boys, Jabbar. I heard him talking to his friends one day, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm from North Philly." I'm like, "What, boy?" And when he finished his conversation, I called. I said, "What you mean you from North Philly? You ain't from no North Philly. You from right here in Nashville, Tennessee. What you talking about? You from North Philly? I'm from North Philly. You ain't from North Philly. You from Nashville, Tennessee." And I'm like, so why are you claiming something that you really don't know about? You know about going there to visit. You've never lived there. You don't know how to move on that type of an environment, that ground. That's not what you about. So what do you mean? What are you trying to project? And he's like, Pop, you gotta state how bad you are, so you from North Philly, so I'm from North Philly. I'm like, boy, you from right here in Nashville, Tennessee. Being from North Philly is a whole different set of circumstances that you know nothing about, that you have never had to live, you never had to deal with, you never even had to think upon. So, don't get it crazy. You from right here in Nashville, Tennessee, born right here, and all of this was planned prior to you even being a thought, to keep you out of an environment that I had to grow up in, North Philadelphia. So no, you make sure you let it be known you from Nashville, Tennessee. And
probably one of the more recent examples of what we're talking about right now is Michael Irvin. Michael Irvin's son came out with a rap record, and he was rapping about the hood and all of that, and Irvin called him out on it. I think about, I'm a big boxing guy. I'm not a big boxing guy, but I like boxing a lot more than I like that MMA type stuff. It looks like caveman fighting, especially when they put women in there and allow them to wrestle and beat each other up. But one of the things that you'll notice, like when you look at the NBA, we're old enough now where, you know, we can look at, I don't even want to go into the discussion as to if he was worthy of the opportunity. I think everybody has their own negative perception of LeBron James' son being able to play on the Lakers. However, we're of the age now that we're starting to see a lot of the professional athletes that we grew up watching. Their sons are now playing college football, if not pro football. You know, and you're like, yeah, I remember when his daddy played. Okay, showing our age. You rarely see that amongst black boxers.
That's
Sugar
true.
Leonard's son didn't fight. Marvin Hagler didn't have any children that fought. Tommy Hearns, the same thing. It's very rare that you'll see a Julio Cesar Chavez, his son fought. But a lot of the fathers are very adamant about, I fought so you didn't have to. I don't want my children to have to fight like that. And many of those children, let's be truthful about it. Many of those children were raised in a lap of luxury. They couldn't fight if they wanted to.
Exactly.
There's something, and there's a saying that I actually heard a young man who actually just committed to Ohio State today, a defensive tackle named Brickle. He said it this way. He said, I had to get it out the mud. That there is getting it out of the mud. What we're seeing right there. And far too often, too many of our children, privileged children, okay, middle class children, they want to act like they didn't been in the mud, like they had to get it out the mud. No, you didn't. And there's a part of that causes all types of chaos among street people. Because you don't know the rules.
Right.
And without knowing the rules of that game, and the only way you learn those rules is somebody's going to teach you those rules. And usually that's a socialization process that's happening. And when we talk about Yummy, that socialization process started probably before he was in kindergarten. That you're going to have to learn. You don't learn those rules on the fly at 20, 21, 22 years old. You're going to end up dead, causing all kinds of untold damage and what have you. So we have a cultural problem, and it's a cultural problem that is not new. So I'm not going to hang that albatross around the necks of contemporary black children, because we had the same problem back in the 80s. We had the same problem back in the 70s. Was fortunate to be raised in a black community. We were solidly working class, meaning my mother and my father. My mother, she worked as a data entry person. My father made unconscionable amounts of money as a steel worker. Okay. But during the day, I was over on Lily Street. I was raised at my grandmother's house through the day. None of us went to daycare. We went to our grandmother's house. It was there that I saw drug abuse. I saw violence. I saw all of these different negative things, dysfunctional things about black folk and black culture. And I knew that I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't run to it. And I yield with that, my brother.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to the program. Peace and blessings, Mayat. It's good to see you. Twin Pyramid, peace and blessings, big bro. It's good to see you. Willie Rivers, peace and blessings, bro. Good to see you. Earth Angel 1105 remix, peace and blessing. It is good to see you. Our program that we're talking about today is titled Born into the Crosshairs, Yummy and the Architecture of Violence. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to watch the first video. Let's see. So we can get a little background knowledge on who Yummy actually is. All right.
mastermind.
Get your hands behind your back.
Or just a kid caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm going to explore all this and more in this video.
He was like an average kid. You know, you tell a kid time to go out of one ear and another ear, you know.
The story of an 11-year-old murder suspect and Chicago's gang violence.
But he wasn't that bad. He didn't, you know, he didn't do nothing to harm nobody.
Today, I'm taking you on a journey to the Windy City to witness one of the most sensational cases of juvenile justice, that of Robert "Yummy" Sandifer.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators.
He was 11 years old when he was charged with first-degree murder in 1994.
So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street.
But if society fails an 11-year-old, how can we be sure justice will prevail? I brought along a special guest to help us explain.
Today, on the south side of the city, a boy's body was discovered beneath a railroad viaduct. He is the young gang member who the police think was involved in a 14-year-old girl's shooting. According to the police, Siobhan Dean was struck by a stray bullet as the suspect started shooting at a group of boys standing on a corner. Police said the suspect, who was 11 years old, had a long police record.
By now, nearly all of us know the story of Robert Sandifer, known as Yummy to his friends. He was first arrested when he was 8 years old. When he was only 11, he became a suspect in the gang shooting of an innocent girl named Siobhan Dean. Several days later, that boy died himself in what Chicago police say was yet another gang-related killing.
Put your hands in the air. Hands up. Put your hands on your head. Stop, or I'll shoot.
The body found under the viaduct hasn't been confirmed to be the 11-year-old, but police say they both have a tattoo.
Yummy completed his task by shooting two opponents of his gang in ambushes within a block of his home. Keandre Britton was shot twice in the back on August 28, 1994. Sammy C., 16, and Siobhan Dean was 14, were shot a short while later in the area of 108th and Wentworth, close to the initial shooting. Siobhan Dean died from her gunshot wound.
He's only 11 years old. And I don't understand justice. If they said he had 22 counts of whatever they said he had, why was he leased out? The kid was sick. He needed help a long time ago.
Was there a lot of shooting around here?
Yeah, especially on 108th, the 108th Street, 108th.
How long has this shooting been going on? Years? Months?
Well, months, no, a few weeks, months, and weeks. Yeah, months and weeks. It just started back last week.
The Roseland neighborhood was one of the most dangerous in Chicago in 1994, and Chicago was on a warpath to reach over 900 murders.
Robert is my grandson, and I love him, and we hope everybody else loves him. In spite of what somebody said, I don't care what nobody said. Robert is mine. He always has been mine, and I love him, and if I could give him part of my heart, I would bring him back as of today. This life is lit for Robert. As Yummy, we love you. We would always love you. And you are still my angel, in spite of what was said. You are my angel. And I love you. I love you. I love you. And you still have a beautiful family, and you have a family. Let the world know that he have a family. He's not from nobody. He's mine, and he have a family.
A 3-day-long citywide manhunt for Yummy was conducted by the police. Yummy's remains were found near an underpass. The Hardaway brothers, who were also fellow gang members, were taken into custody and charged as adults with Yummy's death. They were 14 and 16 years old.
Is this your first time here?
Yeah.
Why are you here?
Because I care.
What do you care? What do you mean you care?
That this happened to a little girl. And I'm concerned about the little. Ooh. It happened right here.
They washed it up. They don't like something.
What do you think?
It's sad. It's just sad. I honestly think it's just sad. It's real sad. And it's a shame.
He was all right. Really down to earth. He was a nice kid, you know. Just got mixed up in the wrong crowd. They just blew it out of proportion, you know. And I would like to, well, yeah, they just blew it out of proportion.
You say you like tell us what your son's really like and to correct the record.
He's an average 11-year-old child that, you know, maybe get hooked up with the wrong group of kids, and, you know, kids that tends to it leads to other things. Maybe he really didn't probably know better, you know. Well, I try to talk to Robert during those times, you know.
What did you say to him?
I would ask him to, you know, get into some kind of boy club, or is it any Boy Scouts, or, you know, community centers and stuff like that. Because I have my other kids in community centers.
What did he say to you about the way he was living? Did he defend it?
He was like an average kid, you know. You tell the kids, let me go out of one ear and another ear, you know.
On March 12, 1983, Lorena Sandifer gave birth to Robert Yummy Sandifer, the fourth of her 10 children. According to published accounts, Yummy's mom was a lady of leisure who mistreated her children, and his father, Robert Atkins, was sentenced to prison 3 months before he was born. On January 1986, they took him out of his mother's residence when authorities discovered Yummy and his elder siblings inside the house alone. In August 1986, the Department of Children and Family Services intervened and gave Yummy's grandmother custody of him and his siblings.
I know the little boy. I took some time out with him, and he seemed kind of quiet. You know, he respects me, and he liked to be in with me. I never had 1 minute a problem with that young man. They was outside playing. My daughter, them, they went around the front. They always take walks. They love to walk. They just walk. And I tell them all the time, y'all stop walking so much. Why y'all be walking so much? But they young folks, you know, they know you're not gonna catch no young person that's gonna stay in no house. Siobhan came from that way running. And the bullet came from that way. The shots come from that way.
So Siobhan was running?
Yeah.
So she's trying to get home.
She was trying to get home.
He was a sweet little kid. He wasn't violent, and he wasn't bad. The way they talking about now, that's not true. It's not true. He was very short. To be his age, he was real short.
Was he a bright color? Was he a smart guy?
Yeah, he was very bright and very smart. He can draw, he can read, he can write.
What kind of food did he like? I mean, was he...
He loved food, gyros. You know, he ate a lot.
Mm-hmm.
When Mama had barbecues, he ate that. He ate a lot. Because he loved cooking.
You think yummy because he loved cooking?
Yeah.
What was his favorite cooking?
Chocolate chip. Oreo. You know them chocolate chips in the blue bag? Okay, well, nobody said he wasn't bad. He was bad, but he wasn't that bad. He didn't, he didn't do nothing to harm nobody.
What do you think people have wrong about it? What do they think about him that's not true?
What they said in the newspaper, he died the way he lived, and I didn't like it.
He wasn't bad. He was kind of bad, but he wasn't that bad. He never bothered nobody. He always used to mind his own business.
When you say kind of bad, what do you mean?
He would do stuff wrong, like ordinary kids would. Some things, but not the bad stuff.
Fighting, stealing, breaking the people out.
Did you ever see like the police coming to his house?
Every other day.
Every other day the police were coming to his house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He was bad.
Are these bad? Yeah, was it? Did you say Robert Sandifer was bad, right?
Yeah.
Did you say the Hardaway boys are bad?
Nope.
I wouldn't know.
Cause they ain't never been, when they was around here, they wasn't bad.
Were they in the game?
I don't know. He used to run around saying gang signs and stuff, doing a gang flash, trying to beat people up, trying to act all hard. Most of the things he used to do was like ride bikes and stuff.
Red bikes?
He liked to ride bikes.
Did you ever see him do it? Like, give me an example.
He ride bikes down things, doing wheelies all the way down there, and come back doing wheelies down here. He would invent something like connect two bikes together, put one frame on the back, and then it's like two bikes in one. He invents stuff.
I mean, it shocked me. He shouldn't have got killed like that. I mean, he didn't have to die the way he was killed, but that's the life you live. That's what happens.
Over the years, there has been ample documentation of the harm he endured at the hands of family members. The coroner recorded 49 wounds in various states of healing, including burns from cigarettes at the time of his death. In the last 18 months of his life, he was taken into custody by the police roughly 30 times, including for 23 felonies. He was charged with 8 felonies, found guilty twice, and given probation as a sentence, the most severe punishment a minor under 13 could get under state law at the time. Police believed that Yummy's shooting had likely been ordered by Black Disciples gang bosses in order to silence him.
Just show your parents that you love them. If you have any problems, talk to somebody, some adult.
In 1994, when the nation was struggling with what politicians claimed was a continual spike in violent crime committed by juvenile offenders, Yummy was one of more than 900 murder victims in Chicago that year. President Bill Clinton signed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act into law on September 13th, just a few days after these heinous shootings. The $30 billion Act, sometimes known as the Crime Bill, put the nation on the road to incarcerating large numbers of African American men and boys. It reduced the age at which a kid might be charged as an adult in federal court. Today, 2/3 of Americans who receive life sentences as juveniles in America are Black, and the bulk of those instances involve children of color. Senator at the time, Joe Biden, was the main author of the legislation.
So I want to ask, what made them do this? They must be taken off the street. And that is, unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now.
They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
The anticipated, unfavorable effects of those policy initiatives were never discussed in the early 1990s criminal justice reform public dialogue. A year later, the community is still struggling from these unthinkable events.
The lyrics cry out for Siobhan Dean. Now a neighborhood gathers to cry and remember together. Remember that one stray bullet killed Siobhan Dean a year ago, and her death, like a falling domino, caused another. Robert Yummy Sandifer, accused of Siobhan's murder, murdered himself just days later. The pain hasn't passed with time.
I'm very, very angry, but I mean, it only hurts me to carry this anger in me. So, you know, I have to release that also and pray and ask God to reveal the truth, what really happened.
Tonight, some 100 people marched from the scene of Siobhan's murder to her home. It's not far, but it seems like a lifetime away. Tonight, candles light the path, but a year ago, there was no light.
I'm still saddened by the mourning of her death, and it's such a tragedy. Maybe it's time for people to stop gangbanging, stop a lot of violence, and maybe one day we can all come together as one and have some unity among our neighborhoods.
Strength is evident in joined hands. Pain is clear in fallen tears. In this Roseland neighborhood where two mothers lost their children, there are others trying to save theirs.
It's been a difficult time for everybody here and their friends and teachers.
What kind of kids were they? Are they?
Average kid. Mischievous. But they had that mentality to kill everybody.
What has changed? What significantly? What has there been any significant change in the last 6-8 months?
There have been a significant change in the boys on how they view things now. Because prior to this, they were happy-go-lucky. But now they think more before they do anything.
My neighborhood. Peace. Will reign. Peace. Will reign. I'll break the code of silence. And make our streets. Safe streets. For our children. Now when she closes, I want everybody to shout out Siobhan's name as loud as you can. Put down the gun. We want peace. Put down the gun. We want peace. Put down the gun.
All right, and there, so that was the video about Yummy. Doc, before I get into my questions, what's your thoughts after watching that? You got to unmute yourself, Doc.
The words of Lynn Toler, sister that used to be on Divorce Court, for so many years. She referred to our community as a disassembled community. And there may not be more succinct a definition of what it is that we're looking at, that we're actually looking at a disassembled community. And not only are we looking at a disassembled community, we're looking at a disassembled community. And it goes on and on and on, that we've gotten it wrong. And when I say that we've gotten it wrong, I can only say that partially because, quite simply, much of what's going wrong within our community has flowed from the decision making and the policies of other people who have impacted our community. People who really have very little care of what happens to it within our community and to our community. And these are Black and white people. Far too often, Black folk are simply evaluated and valued as men are within households. What can you contribute? How can you make my life better? How can you make... That's Black America, especially when you're talking about politically. Think about the fact that much of this movement to begin incarcerating Black folk, warehousing Black men in particular, began under the Clinton administration at the behest of, ironically, the Congressional Black Caucus. They were very public in outcries about if crack cocaine and this type of violence was occurring within white America, you would do something. Mm-hmm. And Joe Biden was put on a task, and he creates this crime bill. And then, of course, as the footage showed you, we had Hillary Clinton's great moment where she refers to Black children as super predators. You know, one of the things for me, and it's the story of Oscar Grant, mm-hmm. brother whose life Michael B. Jordan played in Fruitvale Station. Mm-hmm. Everyone that I knew who had grown up somewhere around a poor to working class community that I would talk to, you know, they would say, yo, did you go see Fruitvale Station? I said, yeah. I said, I went to see it. You think I should go see it? I would tell them no. Fruitvale Station is one of only 2 or 3 films in the history of film and television that drove me to tears. Mm. The reason it drove me to tears is because I think the brother Ryan Coogler, mm-hmm. he was able to in every way capture the brothers that I knew from my neighborhood. And I'm not going to even say from the block, from my neighborhood. We are complex, multidimensional individuals. There is no monolithic title, no worldview that you can put on top of us that would fit all of us. And we look at that moment when Oscar Grant gets shot, and he looks back at the MARTA officer who shot him, and he says, man, you shot me. You shot me. Man, I got a daughter that I got to get home to. Man, you shot me. That's a level and a moment of humanity that those who have been maligned and mischaracterized and treated as if we're the scourge of the earth, it's rarely seen. Very, very, very rarely seen. And we often forget, and I'm a big stickler for this. How do you know what you know? How did you know, what were the things that influenced you to view the world the way that you view the world? And far too often for Americans, it's what they saw on TV. It's what they read on the internet. You know, as scripture says, as a man thinketh, so is he. So if you're being inundated, if you are an American and you're inundated with the worst images and ideas about Black men, how can you help to not grow up without biases against Black men? And I'm talking about Black men that you don't know. I'm not talking about your pawpaw. I'm not talking about your uncle that's the life of the party. I'm talking about the average random brother that you pass on the street that you don't speak to, that other brothers don't speak to. Mm-hmm. That's an issue. So what I'm thinking right now is it's a lot of things. And one of them is one of the other ones that I'm thinking about that I will actually stop talking after and let you take over again. I watched this week a documentary on John Gotti, the new documentary that's on Netflix on Gotti. And you have all these mob types who are talking. And one of them said, there are a couple rules of things that you can't do in the mob. Okay. One of them is deal drugs, because the idea of dealing drugs means that you're facing long time. If they get you in that box and they threatening you with 800 years, you're going to flip on us. Let's look at the killing of Yummy Sandifer through the same lens, because it's the same ethos that these people killed Yummy Sandifer because they think he's going to flip and going to tell some secrets. It's the exact same thing, but somehow it's heightened. It's made worse because, once again, it happens amongst Black folk, and anything that's negative that happens for Black folk is blown up. And if it's something that's positive, well, he's the exception. You'll get one that'll make it through. So the daunting image of Black men in particular is going to be left unimpacted by Black men who do positive things. And I yield, brother.
Excellent, Doc. Doc, dealing with the title, The Architecture of Violence, from your perspective as a historian, what were the key blueprints, the systematic, institutional, and social factors in a city like Chicago in the 90s that constructed the environment with an 11-year-old Yummy Sandifer could become killer and victim?
Well, see, the thing is that I don't think that you can answer that question if you pigeonhole it to the 90s. You need to go back and look at the Daley machine. Richard Daley, he ran Chicago like it was his own personal plantation. And it's one of the things that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he chose Chicago as the city that he was going to apply his idea of nonviolent civil disobedience. King got his ass whooped up in Chicago. Okay. And King actually goes on, he goes public, and he says quite simply, I need some victories. I need some wins. Because anytime he would try and prove something about the slum conditions that Black folk were living in Chicago, and they had a planned protest or march there, by the time they arrived there the next day, it had been cleaned up. Because there were Black folk who worked for Richard Daley. And they went back and said, listen, the protest is going to be at so-and-so and so-and-so. And they would get those sanitation workers out rolling, and they would clean it up. And there was nothing for King to really protest or talk about. So to talk about what's happening in Chicago in the 90s, you have to reel that back. And let's be honest that the residents of modern day Chicago for the last, 60, 70, 80 years, these are not people who were native to the Midwest. You got to remember that Emmett Lewis Till, he's in Chicago. But where's his roots? Where are his roots at? His roots are in Mississippi. So these people are in many ways transplants from the state of Mississippi dropped into Chicago. And one of the things that we rarely want to talk about when we talk about the rise of white supremacy and white terrorism, we like to make it a Southern thing. You ask people, well, where the majority of Klansmen located, and they'll tell you Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, Texas. No, you need to look in the Midwest. The number one repository for Klan members is actually Detroit, Michigan during the 1960s. Why? Because they're up there fighting about jobs. That's where the United Auto Workers is at. That's Motor City. And the same would hold true for a place like Chicago. One of the greatest fallacies, and this is going back to your question, one of the greatest fallacies about Emmett Lewis Till is he didn't understand the South. He didn't understand segregation. Bullshit. Yes, he did. Because Chicago was as segregated then as it is right now. When you hear the murders that occur. And Lord knows Chicago has a bunch of murders every single year, particularly during the summer. Question: how many white folk getting killed on O Block? How many white victims are of that whole idea of drive-by shootings? If white folk were getting, if 10% of white folk were getting killed in Chicago, the way that black folk have been killed for the last 60, 70, 80 years, you'd have the Marines in there cleaning it up. So to talk about 90s and the architecture of violence, I mean, you have a bunch of things that came together, and they're major things. You're talking about the transition of an American economy from a production economy to a service economy. So many of the jobs that moderately employed black men would occupy, like I spoke about my father earlier, being a steel worker, those jobs are fading away. We're no longer producing anything. And you can really hear that when you hear people talking about contemporarily the idea of tariffs and what is it doing to the farmers now. What happens when the jobs disappear? And that's what happened to black men. The jobs disappear. So now you have lower jobs, lesser jobs, poorer paying jobs, because now they're going to be replaced, if they're replaced at all, by service economy jobs. You're going to be a cook, a chef, a waiter. And then combine that with the fact that your whole self-esteem, your whole identity, for far too many black men, their only utility is what they can bring to the table. Remember the weather girl song, ain't nothing going on but the rent. Mm-hmm. You got to have a job if you want to be with me. Mm-hmm. So what use and utility is a black man who can't bring home a paycheck? A paycheck that he largely is not really, he's not in control as to not totally in control as to if he can bring a check home or not. And then you throw in there the introduction of drugs, particularly crack cocaine, where overnight a black man can bring home more money if he plays it right than his father brought home in a full year. So all of those things are playing together. So you create this structure, this architecture, where they have no options outside of trying to go in, once again, to use the underclass lexicon, get it from the mud. They have no choice but to go get it from the mud. And they got to get it however they can get it. And yet you have poised and ready to receive them with open arms the after effects of Joe Biden's crime bill. And they lock brothers up. The 90s was, I graduated high school in 88. Hey, I remember brothers who disappeared. And I'm talking about disappeared through the grave or through a 25-year mandatory sentence as a result of that crime bill. So you definitely have an architecture. You have almost a situation where you have no good moves. When you use the old pimp slang, you better make your next move your best move. What if your next move, whatever you do, it ain't gonna be a best move? It's a survival strategy. And I yield, brother.
Interesting, very, very interesting. When we look at jobs, school, and then the politics that work in these cities, the way that you put it is like that none of this was accidental. This was sort of designed.
I'm not a big conspiracy buff, but what I will say is that it can really appear conspiratorial when other groups have the inside track and you have no access to that. You have limited access to that network. They're going to take care of their own first, as they should. If I was mayor, you would expect for me to look out for my folk as well. It's just that they look out for their people at first, and then you turn around and you look up and everything's gone. And they'll throw you a couple jobs here and there. Like I said, the daily machine. That's the Chicago tradition. In many ways, that's the Midwestern and Southern tradition. Most people get their jobs through the hookup. You go down there and you tell them that I sent you down there, and and tell them, give you a job, and you got a much better chance of getting a job through that path than you do just applying, because anybody can do the job. But who can I get to ingratiate myself, ingratiate themselves to me, so that I can get a favor from them later. We often talk about the idea of nepotism being so strong, but in those discussions of nepotism, we forget about cronyism, which is definitely stronger than nepotism.
So there seems like a lot of traps that Black people have to try to navigate in order to make it in America. So when we're thinking about the stony road that Black people have traveled, how does the short and violent life of Yummy illustrate the specific and often inescapable traps laid on the road for young Black boys in environments that are concentrated in poverty and neglect that you have just talked about? What is the escape?
A praying mother and grandmother, and a whole breaks. Somebody who was able to get their hand upon you and socialize you and literally walk you through the traps and the snares, and also a very willing soul to be pliable. And when we're talking about Yummy, we could argue this kid is involved in the child protective services industry by the age of 3. There was no moment for him to be a child. You hear, and his voice is actually in my ear, his rap lyric, DMX. DMX has a song where he's just talking, and he says quite simply, yes, this is about a boy. This is about a man who was never allowed to be a boy. How many of those do we have within our community? Where that developmental process that they should have had to grow, to develop, to learn who they are, learn what your likes and your dislikes are, that was muted and stunted early on. So in many ways, your only hope is going to, if you're Black and you're young and you're born in some dubious conditions, you're gonna have to have God, a personal angel, on your side. You're going to have some school teachers who are going to say, listen, I think that you're bright and you would be able to do, and they're going to have to intercede. You're going to have to have parents who may not be, my mother and father were not formally educated, but Catherine Viola Jones had nary a problem with telling me, and I'm in college, and she would say, boy, I need you to come down here this weekend. I need to look in your face. Because only by looking in my face could she tell how I was doing and try and discern what it is that I was involved in.
Right.
And so parenting, it's no different than the development of any other human. These are children. These are human children who are able to be swayed, who are able to be molded. Make no mistake about that. So the question has to arise. What happened? And I have a cousin who, I won't mention his name, but I have this picture of him. He's a maybe a year old as a child. And I had the picture up on my board at work because he ended up not making it to see 30, killed by street violence. Okay, had incredible amounts of incarceration time. So my question is quite simply this: what happened to him? What were the influences upon him? What was he exposed to? And it always sobers me up and reminds me that what we do as Black men, as mentors, as educators, it matters. And we may not see how much it matters or who it even impacts, but it does matter. And that's why, like this space right here, anytime I'm in front of a microphone, I consider it a sacred space. because the power of life and death is found in the tongue. It's found in words.
Mhm.
And we have to, at every moment, every opportunity that we get, we have to capitalize upon doing that very thing. So when you're talking about Yummy Sandifer, and you're talking about the two brothers who killed him, okay,
Right.
Derek and Craig Hardaway. What happened to them? One got a 45-year sentence, the other one got 60 years.
Wow.
I mean, really think about that. Think about how tragic this is. And think about how, unlike the mafia, who would rub you out as well because they think you're gonna be snitching, but they usually go home at the end of the day. For whatever reason, through hook or crook, many Black folk don't go home at the end of the day.
Wow. Doc, just thinking, on that, what you said about the prayers and the grandmother, and we're looking at the mom who was a prostitute,
yes,
a daddy that was a criminal that was locked away in jail. And just by looking at the video, to me, Granny seems delusional because she talking about he was a good child, ain't did no wrong, this, that, and the other. But this dude got bodies on him already, and if he been charged with 30 felonies, what's wrong with her view? She can't see reality.
It's very hard to see reality when you're looking through rose-colored glasses. When you're looking at a child that you love, it's very, very difficult. How many parents do you know that are able to literally sit down and look across from their child and say, you know what, he ain't shit? Very few. There's always going to be a soft landing spot in their heart for them. And to be perfectly honest with you, it's predictable, it's understandable, because parents, and especially grandparents, they want to protect their child. And when you're talking about protecting him, she's going to protect him to the very end. And those things that they're saying about him, all he has to say is, no, mama, I don't be doing that kind of stuff. It's very similar to an individual who is in a relationship with someone. Okay. And you'll hear this person in a relationship say, man, either it's positive or negative, man, you just don't know. And they're like, what? She act like that? Man, I don't believe that. What you do to her? And what it is quite simply, your exposure to that person is fairly limited. You don't know how this person is when they're disappointed. You don't know how this person behaves when they didn't get a job offer or promotion or what have you. They might bring that home and whoop the hell out of you. But when they go to Thanksgiving dinner, and let's be very clear that the worst mob boss, drug dealer, who my man Bernard Hopkins, strong arm robber, and that to me is one of the most horrific crimes that I hope I never experience. Somebody that come up with his hands and slap you enough that you run your stuff. They got their fat feet sitting under somebody's Thanksgiving table. They're exchanging gifts at some Christmas party. So we're not talking about necessarily bad people. You don't know all about anyone, to be absolutely honest with you, unless you have lived tethered to them and can get inside of their minds. You really don't know them. How many parents have been shocked? My sister is the world's greatest advocate for her kids and her grandkids. And it flows directly from when she would get in trouble when we were in school. And my mother went up there to that school. My mother would say to my sister, quit lying. You know you did it. These people ain't lying on you. Blah, blah. She said every single time she took the teacher's side. And I said to myself, when I had kids, I ain't gonna never do that. And she meant that shit, because is not taking. You can't say nothing to Sherry Jones Marshall about her grandchildren. Okay. Nothing at all. Okay. And one of my youngest niece, Alexis, she's the fighter of the family. Alexis got in trouble on the bus. She got into a fight on the bus, and they said that she would be suspended off of the bus, or bus riding privileges were suspended for like 2 weeks. And my sister went up there and said, "Oh no, y'all ain't gonna do her like that." Blah blah blah. Did the whole Medea thing. They asked her to sit down because they had something they wanted to show her. And today's buses now have video cameras on them. And she watched as my niece slid up seat by seat by seat. She moved up about 13 rows to attack this girl, and denied it. And my sister, she finally said, "Oh, I guess she did do it."
Wow.
So you have a situation where those that we're looking at, and to go back to Oscar Grant. Oscar Grant was a weed man, maybe a dope peddler. That's what he was. But that doesn't cancel out that he was somebody's son, that somebody loved him, that he loved his child beyond measure. That doesn't, those things are not mutually exclusive. So she didn't have the full view on who that little Negro was. Okay. He was someone that came up and hugged her and, "Oh, grandma, blah, blah." Yeah, that's a part of him. Okay. But he got that other part of him too, which is in many ways, and I hesitate to say that he was bad, but I think that his peer gave us the greatest description of who he actually was. Yeah, he was bad. Okay, he's out here fighting, he's out here doing all kind of stuff. Adults didn't see that part of him, and we all know that we went to school with kids that we were like, "Oh no," you see him coming, "Oh, here you go." He getting ready to say something, to do something that ain't right. Whereas adults who did that, they can turn on that charm. "Oh, yes, ma'am. Oh, yes, ma'am. I didn't."
Definitely.
Yeah, your bike came up missing. You knew Yummy had your bike.
Exactly.
And as someone put it, the whole system failed them. My mother, and this is dealing specifically with the stealing of bikes. She told me, she said, "You couldn't have brought no bike here that I hadn't bought." Because I'm going to ask questions. Where does bike come from?
Exactly.
And so you have to begin to ask these questions, and you have these blaring red signs of, well, this is a child that is not being raised, that is not being socialized in a way that they have any semblance, any chance of being a productive member of our society.
Definitely. Listening to that and reading Earth Angel's comments reminded me of my son, my oldest boy. Well, not my oldest, my next oldest, Rasul. And one day we were having a conversation, and he said, "Pop, you call me a nigga, and you ain't never called me no nigga before." I said, "Because you out here doing nigga shit. That's why I'm calling you a nigga. And you need to stop it. Because I didn't teach you that. I didn't raise you like that." It's that, I don't want to say, is it a draw on them to go out and do this dumb shit that they should not be doing? Is it a draw? What is that? Attraction?
We were all born in sin. That's all I got for you. I think we have a propensity, a tendency to do sinful things. It's who we are. And you sit here and you say, "Oh, well, why did you do that?" If given the chance to do something that is fun and enjoyable and full of sin, that's going to be the choice for most people. It's just what it is. It is our human nature And it's just, there is no other way of looking at it and saying, oh yeah, you're just bad, you're just born bad. We're all born bad. And if given, one of the things like Maya just put up there, a learning experience. Man, look here. I drive a black Dodge Charger. Okay, blacked out. Okay, and I ain't got no regular engine in it either. Okay. Pull up next to me. Pull up next to me and see what happens. I take that as a personal affront. Disrespectful. Okay, especially if you rolling in like a 5.0 Mustang, you better go get a GT. You about to learn. A Porsche, I'll give it to you. I have no problem with giving it to you. We'll give it to you, and when I get in front of you, I'm gonna cut in front of you and I'm gonna brake check you. All right. Now I've that was my past. Now I have lived enough to understand that, and this is how I rationalize it. The lion ain't got to roar at everything that comes around it. You know that's a lion. And if that lion wanted to tear your hind parts off, that lion could. And a big part of that comes from the fact that I'm 55 now. Okay. And I know I need my car to make it to work. Okay. And if I get my car either taken or totaled, I'm gonna get to work. Okay. I think I'll be able to finesse my wife to give me a couple rides until the truth come out of how I didn't tow my joint up. But that's experience. Now I look at my two sons. They gonna do fucked up shit. They're gonna do nigga shit. And it's just what it is, because they don't understand the consequences of what it is that they're doing. And as dutiful parents, we ain't gonna let them experience it either. And it's just what it is. It's how life goes. That's the learning curve, to the point where an erosion of life experiences. And I will not lie, my eyesight ain't what it used to be, and my hand-eye coordination and my reflexes ain't the same. So I can't drive 120 and think I can swerve across 3 lanes and do it smooth like I'm in the Fast and the Furious. Them days is finally over. So it's one of those things of, it's a learning curve. But what happens when you're 3 years old and you're involved in a child protective services system? I'm writing this book right now, and one of the individuals I'm writing about is a young lady who was put in the foster care system by her parents voluntarily. She was 8 years old. And one of the things that she constantly says is, quite simply, like there are basic things like making homemade macaroni and cheese, turkey wings, things that Black folk, we almost believe that we learn this through osmosis. But the truth of the matter is that we didn't learn it through osmosis. Somebody taught us. And she uses a familiar refrain: who would have taught me that?
Right.
Everybody abandoned me. And when you look at a figure like Yummy, you look at many of the young Black boys and girls who are growing up amongst us, they're learning some of the darndest lessons, but they're not learning what we would consider to be traditional life skills. They're learning how to survive. They're learning how to scam. They're learning how, and that's not the majority of them, but it's many of them. And what ends up happening out of that many is that those who do learn life skills, hopefully they stay on that correct and straight path and don't get sort of seduced by the attraction of evil doing and sin.
Right.
However, some of them will. But those who stay on that path, one has to really wonder, and this is one of the dangers of contemporary Blackness. What's the thing that ties them together? Because in many ways we've had this the rise of this term called Black fatigue.
Right.
And it originated with the idea of Black folk being tired of having to deal with these microaggressions and racism. But it took on a whole nother life where now you have people saying, we are tired of niggas.
Exactly.
And how tired, how long, what level of tiredness does one have to reach before they cut them loose? Before you just say, you know what, I'm gonna concentrate on mine. I just need to however much life I got left to live, I want to go ahead and build some stuff for me so I can, versus spending an entire life amongst people who behave as if they're Sisyphus. They're pushing that boulder up the hill and it never makes it to the ridge.
Wow. Excellent. Excellent. I want to go ahead and take this time out to welcome the new people we had to join us. Mayat, peace and blessings. We're glad you're here, Queen. Tranquil, peace and blessings. We're glad you're here. Sandra Day, peace and blessings. We're glad you're here. And Sandra says that she had interactions with Yummy. She was from the neighborhood. And Brother Roy, peace and blessings, big bro. We are glad you are here. And yes, our topic today is Born into the Crosshairs, Yummy and the Architecture of Violence. Now, Doc, your work in Black male studies examines the construction of Black masculinity. How did the environment Yummy grew up in, including the influences of gangs, shape his understanding of what it meant to be a man? And how does this case force us to confront often lethal pressure placed on Black boys to perform certain types of masculinity? And really, we can not just look at Yummy, but we can expand it, to all of them. Period. What's your thoughts?
Give me the first part of the question.
Okay, so of course, dealing with your studies and
you deal with a lot of multi-part questions, brother. I get it.
How did the environment Yummy grew up in, including the influences of gangs, shape his understanding of what it meant to be a man? That's the first part.
Yeah, I mean, the first part of the question, and once again, we won't focus upon Yummy. We'll focus upon look, see, there you go. What did I tell you?
Yeah.
Told you. He stole bikes. I've never met that brother. I know that brother very well. He stole some bikes. You saw his little say, hey, well, let me tell you, I ain't snitching, but if your bike came up missing, and there's a reason why they knew right where to go to retrieve that bike. You know who took that bike. and the reason that he probably took that bike is because he didn't want to walk all the way home. So he saw a bike and he jumped on it and he rode it home. Almost like we do the modern day when you're in downtown Houston, they have these sort of e-bikes that you can rent and you ride it to wherever you're going, and then you just put it back on the thing. Yummy could have been an entrepreneur. He already understood that entire thing. Look, they had a bike racket. Yeah, hold it. And I like the Sister Sandra put they, because he wasn't alone in what it was that he was doing. Okay. But the thing is that when you're talking about the development of masculinity, you're talking about manhood, what a man ought to be and ought to do. We got to deconstruct it all the way down to there's some things that are biologically that you inherit. There's some things that are just with you. Kind of if you find someone who's a liar, they didn't necessarily learn how to lie. They're just a liar. That's what's in them. So you have that biological part, and it really boils down to the idea of nature versus nurture. But I would like to think that the bigger part of who we become as men is nurture. And when we look at it, a figure like Fred Hampton, Chicago Black Panther Party fame, Hampton says people learn primarily through two ways, through observation and participation. So a child who is being raised up in a household is going to have modeled, and I can speak about my own household. My father's not affectionate. My father's, he's a lot of things, but he ain't affectionate. My sister, one of her favorite things when I go back to Ohio, she'll say, hey, go up and hug daddy. And I go up and, hey, big guy, how you doing? And he'll punch me in the chest. And he'll say, well, I'm from Men Don't Hug Each Other. Get up off of me. I don't know where you got that from. But he was a provider. And what I saw my father do is get up every single day, go to that steel mill, and he worked swing shift. Okay. And so sometimes he had to be there at 7. Then next week it would be like 3. Next week it's going to be 11. But he was there every single day. And when I came home from school, if it was a 3 o'clock shift that he had to be in, he had cooked dinner for us. So when we walked in, the food was already done. Okay, which led to a bunch of discord that still exists between me and him to this day, because he says that as a child, he recognized that I was an asshole. He would make 2 T-bone steaks smothered with mushrooms and onions. I would eat both the steaks, and I would leave him all the mushrooms and onions. I'm being considerate. Okay? And he would discover that when he got home. However, he's a provider, and I don't know any other way. I don't know. What do you do if you don't get up and go to work? What you do all day? I didn't have a model for that. I didn't have an understanding of that. My father, he brought his check home. My mother, she paid the bills. At least he thought she paid the bills. My father is from that era where they don't want to owe anyone. My mother, she gonna put the minimum payment on it, Playboy, and that's going. And we literally did not find that out until my mother went home to glory, and she was the Home Shopping Network. Okay, she was ordered. She started Christmas shopping on December 26th, and would have stuff all through the house, stuff that she couldn't find the following, when Christmas rolled around again. My father, one of our classic lines in our family. My mother was gone for probably about 3-4 months, and we're still getting packages from the Home Shopping Network. He asked my sister, he said, you don't think she ordering stuff from heaven, do you? If she can, I bet she is. Okay. But, that's my model. I'm a very simple person. You let me know where I'm supposed to be, and I tell you, I will be there. It ain't gonna be no change ups, no nothing like that. I'm gonna be there, and I get the use out of everything that I purchase. My old computer is probably about 12 years old. That's the one, big boy. I try and be faithful to him, and that's why I kept blinking out earlier, because I think big boy then finally, he tired. So I learned how to be a man by watching my father, by watching the men in my family. I learned the positives and the negatives. All of those lessons were not positive. My mother had 7 brothers. Out of those 7 brothers, 5 of them died of drug overdoses. I discovered 2 of them. So I learned about the idea of the hurt and harm that comes from not only IV drug use, but also from alcohol and alcoholism. Alcoholism runs rampant on my father's side, IV drug use on my mother's side. So all of those things in my environment combined to make me who I am. And many people who come across me, they'll say, "Oh man, I can't believe you got 5 degrees." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, you can't believe I got 5?" They say, "Because you act so normal." And I'm like, "Yo, I'm just like my uncles. I was raised in a working class community and home. We don't know nothing about putting no airs on, and this will probably upset some people, but we ham and chitlin and hog maw and ham hock eating people, and that's the home I was raised in, and to divorce myself from that, what do you do? What do you do if you don't eat chitlins on Christmas? What do you do? What y'all eat? And that's what it is. So when you're talking about me learning all of those lessons and all of them not being positive, once again, a more dangerous situation, even more dangerous than learning the wrong lessons, is to learn no lessons. Where you're trying to piece together an idea and an understanding of manhood, of masculinity, and what have you. Because if left unchecked, you're going to end up in the grave or inside of a prison cell. And I can guarantee you, Sister Sandra, as she was talking about it, they had a bike stealing racket. Now, does that not seem like a kid level dope ring, weed ring? This is what men do. This is what we've seen them do in our neighborhood. You know that he's been exposed to the prostitution.
Right.
His father having a gun charge, he's been exposed to those things. So in many ways, if you're not careful, you get a chance to see what a man does, what a man's capable of doing, and you begin to in every way mimic those things, even when they're not good for you. And one thing I can tell you about this nation is goes back to Joe Biden's crime bill. The margin of error, the room of error for Black folk is non-existent. One of my first messages to my collegians, male and female, is don't get nothing on your record. Because you get something on your record, they got you. Okay. And they're never going to forgive you for that. I know a young man who got a theft charge, and he was 16 years old. And he said, well, that's been expunged. You can't even see that. I said, let's see. And we paid the money to go ahead and get his record sent in as if he was applying for a job. And when we received that paperwork back, guess what was there? He said, well, they ain't supposed to be able to see that. I said, yeah, and they ain't gonna never tell you that they saw it either.
Wow. Okay, Doc, second part of that question is, how does this case force us to confront the often lethal pressure placed on Black boys to perform certain types of masculinity? And one point that I want to bring out to you, and I don't know whether this affected Yummy or not, but we hear it often where the pressure of, okay, you're the man of the house now. Dad's gone out of town, or whether you're the man of the house, you got to maintain this, that, and the other. Do these things produce negative aspects on the Black boys?
Well, certainly, because it removes that very crucial moment of adolescence. You're not allowed to be a child. You're not allowed to grow. You have major issues that you have to deal with that no child is capable of even addressing or dealing with. How dare you tell an 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old that he the man of the house? Hell, how dare you tell somebody beneath the age of 20, 21, 22 that they're the man of the house? Okay, they're not equipped psychologically to deal with that type of pressure. They don't have the monetary resources to do it. It's one of the reasons why many people who advise Black men about marriage, they tell them, don't even think about being married until your 30s. Because in contemporary society, what we're looking at is quite simply, you need to be able to do two things principally: provide and protect. And can they provide at the age of 22, 23? No. And so out of that comes a cascade and a spiral of relationship problems and issues. And once you get behind that 8 ball, it's almost impossible to get out from behind it. Especially when you have people who have been convinced that if he was a real man and he would be paying all the bills and taking care of you, and then you would have an extra $1,000 every week to get your hair and your toes done, and then you're going to need to get a couple bags so that you can look the part. And what kind of car are you going to have? Who's got that? Especially at that young, tender age. And if you force them into those very stifling, uncomfortable positions, what you're in essence telling them to do is get rich or die trying. And that is a daunting message to give to some young folk whose brains haven't even developed all the way. They're not able to weigh out different things. I talk to young people every semester, and I let them know, I'm like, okay, check it out. This is when your midterm is. This is when, when your reports are, they know when it's due. And I've had many of them come up and say to me, let me run this by you. I'm like, okay. I want to go to the toga party, something that was created by one of my students, Julian Scott. I want to go to the toga party. but it's the night before midterms. And if I flunk this class, I'm gonna lose my scholarship. What you think I should do? For someone with a fully functioning brain, you know, the answer is obvious. But they struggle with those types of thinking. And many of them come up with this conclusion. You know what? This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to toga party and I just plan on not going to sleep. I'm gonna study for the test. That's an issue. That's an issue. That's a major issue. And so you're going to take someone who, and I mean, really think about this situation, that you have to be a fool to look at a 12, 13-year-old and say, well, you the man of the house now. So you got a fool trying to fall behind a child to head a household. A child that hasn't even developed, their brain hasn't even developed.
Right.
And the truth of the matter is that one of the things that our community truly gets wrong is that we're not studying the science of marriage and the science of relationships and what they're useful for. This is about legacy building. This isn't about titillation. This isn't about how round her butt is. Okay, how well she rides you. That ain't got nothing to do with this legacy building that we're talking about. You referenced James Weldon Johnson's work earlier when you talked about this stony road that we trod. You're talking about not even being able to get on the stony road when you have children, babies, taking the position of men. And then the thing that problematizes that even more is these are boys who have not sat at the foot of any man usually. They have no idea what it is that you're talking about. How long does it take? How long does it take for maturity to set in for men, for them to transfer from being males to being men and understanding that you're going to be the sacrificial lamb? That in every way, when it comes to your family, your job, and this is the reason why Black men die before anybody else. Okay, what demographic you're talking about, we die first. But the reason for that is quite simply, we are expected, demanded that we set ourselves afire to keep others warm. And that's just really what it comes down to. You got to set yourself afire to keep other people warm. All right. Now you sit around here and think that you supposed to have some luxury. Come on. You know, my son, he was just over here visiting last week. And he refers to my video game system as the miracle machine. I'm like, man, why you call it the miracle machine? He said, it's a miracle. It still works, man. I got an Xbox 360. Okay. It don't cool itself off. I got a fan that I done rigged up that I set on top of my system to keep it cool. That's how I'm able to play it. The only game that I own, he went out and bought me 2 games for Father's Day. Talking about, you know how far and wide I had to search to find some Xbox games. This is love. Okay. I got 3 games. But all I play is NCAA college football 2010. Anybody that knows the NFL, Michael Crabtree is on the cover of my game. Think about that. Michael Crabtree. Wow. That's a name that, last time we saw Michael Crabtree, he was getting arrested for DUI. Okay. Wow. But it comes down to, listen, they got other things that they need. They want cars. They need cars. They need transportation. They need a way to exert their independence. And I don't want them having to work like I had to work 3-4 jobs, try and make it over. So yeah, I'm gonna grab my controller that my German Shepherd, whose name is Huey P. Newton Freeman. Okay, during one of the unwise moments when I left him at home by himself, he chewed through my controller, so you gotta hold it a certain way for it to even work. But that's fine for me. It still work. I'm good money. How many 8, 9, 10-year-olds would be able to not to have delayed gratification? You know, for a larger good. They're children. And unfortunately, when we're talking about the absence of fathers, and we talk about this so often, we always look at the impact it's going to have on Black boys. We need to also look at what's the impact upon Black girls. What happens to a girl's understanding and construction of man and masculinity when the first man who was supposed to ever love her is not there to do it? So she's going to go out and she's going to look for love wherever she can find it. And more than likely, she's going to find it in Yummy and ride on the back of one of them stolen damn bicycles that he got. We in trouble.
All right. So, Doc, the fact that Yummy was ultimately killed by two other brothers, ages 14 and 16, and is a devastating part of the story, how do you suggest we begin to unpack the internal community dynamics that lead to such a tragic outcome without, and this is the important part, without airing dirty laundry in a way that feeds racist narratives? How do we do that? Because I don't have a clue.
We got to put our hands on our children. You know, when Winston Churchill said the greatest investment that any country could make is in books and bottles, he was talking about education and children. We need to be having children and we need to educate them. Now, when I talk about educating them, it is, you know, we have to really begin to look at the educational process from we got to reverse engineer it. And we have to ask ourselves something that I doubt many Black parents, I know many Black parents don't ask themselves, because they're trying to in every way keep their head above water. What's the outcome you desire? What's the outcome? Because see, without an outcome, a desirable outcome, a goal, the end goal, what are we doing here? We're just showing up aimlessly, you know, having a social experiment. We need to be the only ones that are pouring into our children. And by we, I am not even talking about the removal of white teachers. What I am calling for, though, because it really doesn't make a difference if you have a Black teacher or a white teacher. If the curriculum and the instruction that they're giving out, which is in many ways a script, and they're going to evaluate your teacher effectiveness at the end of the year by how many of these children were able to, and what percentage were they able to answer these questions. Black folk need to be creating the script. We need, instead of having so many teachers who are basically the actors that stand in front of a classroom, we need some writers who are putting the words in their mouth. We need to have a doubling down on curriculum and instruction. Okay. Because I'm tired. You know, I just did a Juneteenth talk and I'm talking with these young people and they're all collegians, right? In this auditorium. And these are the enlightened ones who actually showed up to engage in Juneteenth. I asked them, how many of you read the Diary of Anne Frank? Darn near every hand went up. How many of you read Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart? One or two hands go up. How many of you have ever read Asada? Not a single hand goes up. That extends all the way down to how many of you have ever heard of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad? How many of you have heard of Robert F. Williams? The list can go on and on and on and on. Fannie Lou Hamer, you know, we can go whatever direction that one would want to go to. Gabriel and Nanny Prosser. And when the answer is no, we don't know any of them. Let's call that what it is. You've been dumbed down, and you are in many ways white-minded. In the very images that lead white folk to vilify and to be afraid of Black folk, you're consuming those images and only those images. So it's not accidental that at the end of the road, you're going to look crazy. And you are going to be, in many ways, if you're not the consummate employee working for white folk, you may be one of these rebellious Negroes who go out and become an entrepreneur, a scammer, or what have you. But at the end of the day, let's say you made $1 million. Well, you're going to be over there at the Coach factory. You're going to be over there at Cartier, because they have instilled in your mind that buying their little trinkets that they put their name on is much more beneficial to you now and in the future than to drop $250 over there to the independent black school that's not headed by Umar.
Wow. And so is there a way that we actually tell the story or correct if we're doing like if we're out there doing a public talk? Is it how can we talk about the problem and not feed into or give the racists more ammunition to use against us when we're talking about that problem? Is that even a way to do that?
I think you tell the truth. You tell the truth of where we are and where we can go. You don't get up there and lie about anything. You know, we are a people that are facing tremendous challenges. But when we talk about facing tremendous challenges, don't dare miss the opportunity to talk about what is the original source and cause of those problems. Because there's a way for you to go ahead and I was earlier today, for some reason, I started watching Phil Donahue. Okay, yeah, and and of course, we know when Khaled was on there and he did his thing when Minister Farrakhan was on there, but I chose to watch a episode about black folk who were basically passing, and they had Rock Newman on there as a name I hadn't seen or heard in a long time, and he said some very insightful and inspirational things, but I'm looking at that and I'm like, wow, this is very interesting. And you have the classic commentary, and it is, why don't we just stop talking about race and just move forward and build things together? Nobody that is not in a beneficial position wants that. It'll be of no use for them. Because in many ways, what we need to understand is, why is it that black folk are wilding out? Why are black folk in Chicago so poor? Can you talk about the story of black Chicagoans without tying it to Mississippi? In my opinion, no, you can't. But it's the same classic thing where we talk about when you start telling the story of our people. If you start our story not with the building of pyramids in Mali, Songhai, okay, Timbuktu. You started in the hull of a slave ship. That's where we'll always be. So you have to frame the story in a liberating way, and let's be very honest about it. One of the things that we need to do, and it's one of the principal building blocks for helping black children to have some semblance of psychological health. We got to teach them to not be ashamed of slavery. We need to embrace the slave experience. Okay, there's no shame to be found there. Do the Jews have shame about the Holocaust? They talk about that 10-year period every chance they get. Okay, and part of what we're seeing right now occurring is a direct extension of that, because the world sympathizes with them. Whereas when you shy away from your story, talking about your story, about what you experienced, you ain't get no sympathy for that. It's one of the reasons why the black brand is so vilified by pretty much every population that is on the face of the planet Earth. But go ahead, brother.
Wow. I wanted to ask you about that, to go a little deeper, because I have heard black people say, I ain't no slave. I ain't never been no slave. My ancestors ain't never been no slave. That there's, even when you say, well, your root is from Africa. I ain't never been no Africa. My people ain't never been no Africa. There's this thing.
The Fred Sanford answer.
Yeah.
Fred Sanford traced his lineage to St. Louis. And Billy Eckstein. Anything beyond that, I don't know nothing about it.
How do we deal with that part of the conversation? How is there any way to get them to accept that? Yeah, your roots are from Africa. This is where you came from. Yeah, our ancestors were slaves. Is there any way to get them to accept that as the reality?
Yeah, by telling them the truth and explaining it to them. You know, it's impossible to explain it. It's impossible to achieve what it is you're seeking to achieve if they don't even know who Marcus Mosiah Garvey is. And Garvey's great piercing question of what are you? And when you got black folk talking about, well, I'm black. You got other ones talking about, well, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Dominican, I'm Haitian, I'm Jamaican, I'm Brazilian. No, you're not. What you are is a person of African descent. In the moment that you understand that you are a person of African descent is the moment that you go from being a global minority to the global majority. And unfortunately, that is a message and a teaching that needs to be taught on both sides of the Atlantic. Because we can't let the African off thinking that whitewashing that they received as far as colonization goes is still not with them. I mean, come on, think about it. How many Africans have you met that speak French? Okay. Well, okay. You know, one of the individuals that I know that you know that I loathe, you know, that good looking motherfucker, you know, Idris Elba. You know, here I met that brother on the block over there in Baltimore. I thought he was a homeboy. Yeah, I'm flipping through the TV, hit BBC, and there he is with a British accent. Where that Negro get a British accent? You know, so you really have to ask yourself and wonder, what's the job that has been done on our minds to the point where you can physically, and I mean physically see like commonalities. Okay, physical traits are very similar. Look at, although I hate the Boston Red Sox, I'm a Yankee fan through and through, but look at David Ortiz. Okay, look at Manny Ramirez. Okay, come on. You can't tell me that Africa ain't on them. And brothers, you cannot tell me that you don't see Mother Africa when you looking at them Brazilian sisters with them big butts and big thighs. That's Africa. The only difference between you and them is that your ancestors got off of that slave ship a little further north than they did. You have a different cultural reference, but how does that preclude you from recognizing kindred souls, kinship? And it's not in it's in other people's best interest to re-emphasize for you, no, you're Ghanaian. And we don't really deal with the Nigerians, let alone the black folk, the cotton pickers in America. It's all divisive. And it all comes from one source, and that is your mind. Who taught you that? Where did you learn that? Because you didn't enter into this world with that as a knowledge base. You simply didn't.
Definitely. Let's look at this term, super predators.
Hillary.
Now, that word has worked itself, as we saw in the video, it worked itself up into the political mainstream. How does that happen? Where is the planning on that? Where did that come?
How does what happen? The term or the
term grow itself all the way up into the political mainstream, where it's coming out your president and your senators and presidents' wives' mouths.
It is as much a rallying call for white folk as MAGA is. It makes sense to white folk to refer to black folk as black children as super predators, because that means that that we didn't do anything wrong. that they are just born into this world bad. They're born into this world irredeemable. Look at them. And at the exact same time that you will call a Yummy a super predator, you wouldn't dare say that about Dylan Roof. Okay. Definitely wouldn't say that about Jeffrey Dahmer. And I know we talked about this previously. Jeffrey Dahmer went to Ohio State. He was a Buckeye. He didn't graduate, but he attended Ohio State. So in many ways, it's a rallying call. Okay, a lot of people will call it a what is it that they call a dog whistle? It's not a dog whistle. Okay, it's the Democratic Party's leadership saying to America, yeah, we ain't forgot about y'all. And what we're going to do is we're going to do something horrific to these niggas. And they can't say niggas, so they say, oh, look here, they're super predators. As if they came out the womb that way. They didn't come out the womb that way. Okay. There's a cultural framework that led to that. And so when you're talking about politics, they try to say things that are complex and are symbolic in short phrases. Super predator is one. Okay, remember this one? Yes, we can. That's another one. MAGA. That's another one. In many ways, you're talking about political football that is being played, and so it's not only probable; it's very likely that a term like a super predator would stick, because quite simply, you have people who don't recognize even the humanity in Black folk, who may be poor and or working class. These people are animals. These people are this, these people are that. And it explains their world, and it allows you to not to dismiss them and to wash your hands with them in one fell swoop.
Wow. Now, do you know of if the term super predator has been debunked by any of these Black groups and made the politicians apologize for putting that term out there?
Not that I know of.
Wow.
No. I mean, you got to remember that Blacks in the Democratic Party during that time, this is the Clinton era. Okay. They, very similar to what we saw with Joe Biden when he was struggling to win the nomination. You had Clyburn down there in South Carolina who came forward to whip Black folk in shape and in order. No, this is what we're gonna do. No, you know what? It was actually Hillary Clinton, ironically, that he did that for. That he came forth and he was like, no. The goal is to win, and Bernie can't win. So we're gonna support Hillary. So in many ways, you're dealing with, and you have to really ask yourself, do Blacks in the Democratic Party have an independent voice? Or are they just expected, in many ways demanded, that they go along with the party line? And if we can say that about Blacks in the Democratic Party, we can also say that about Blacks, definitely say about Blacks in the Republican Party. You can say that about Black folk on the Supreme Court, most notably Clarence Thomas. They know what the script is. They know where their butter is breaded at, and they're going to follow that. After a certain point, I do believe that you come with the realization of what is it that I can actually do to uplift my people. And there is a risk reward involved. And when you see that Black folk have been struggling since 1619, why risk your position and your money to try and uplift them? And if you do, what are the chances of you having any success? Because in many ways, we're talking about such large things. Now, you could do a very, like the sister Jasmine Crockett does, you can do some rah-rah public belittling of white folk, but the system doesn't change.
Right.
The system hasn't been impacted at all by your little cutesy talks in the way, bad, what was it called? Bad butch build. Yeah, right. Black man with that. It titillates our people. But as far as addressing gerrymandering, addressing all of these other issues, rarely anything happens. And so we really need to return to basics, you know, and get back to the point where we are willing to fight for our collective good at every turn, like we see the Jews do, like we see the Italians do, like we see every other group do in America. You saw when the Cubans tried to fight, you know, it's just that they was wrong-headed and you know, and voted for their own demise, which is was kind of hilarious that, you know, you did, you know, said that he was only going to get rid of the criminals that was over here, and it never done. They should have came and talked to us. I would have told them straight to their face, you do recognize that if you hear illegal, they consider you a criminal.
Exactly.
How's that not cross your mind?
Now, I want us briefly, because I know our time is running, but since we know that there has to be the architects that put the systems together, how do we assign responsibility among policymakers, law enforcement, leadership, school administrators, even slumlords who all contribute to the blueprint that created Yummy's world? What do you say about these architects? How do we assign responsibility?
You assign responsibility to them by voting them out. Nothing more, nothing less. Now you can sit around here and rah, have all these speeches, have all these public forums, all these discussions about things. Are you registered to vote? And regardless of what you want to say about the electoral game, whoever is in that seat has a lot of power. And what you want are people who look at the world, not even that necessarily look like you, but look at the world and view the world and consider the world and want to see the world transform into what you wanted to see transform into, and you need to elect them. You know, you think about a place like I'm in Texas, and the governor of Texas has tremendous power. He in many ways is the one who determines what textbooks are going to be used. He in many ways is going to be the one that's going to assign the budgets, you know, make appointments and what have you. Wouldn't you rather that be a person that looks at the world like you do? But the danger in all of that is quite simply the election of individuals who will get into office and in their own sort of blackface way do the exact same thing that the white folk that they're trying to mimic have done, and will be as unfair and as biased as they are. And it's one of the reasons why we have this continuing socioeconomic and racial divide. Tell the truth. Do right by people. Okay? And you could build a coalition. The coalition of have-nots in this nation would be undefeated if you're able to educate them and you're able to speak to them in a righteous voice. You run aground when you begin to play favorites. What is your agenda? What are your policies? How do you want this world to go? Okay, state it out open and clearly. And if you can't motivate people and get them out, get them to register, and then get them out to vote, you're going to lose. You're going to continue to lose.
And so how would we term that, if you wanted to take that message to the everyday Black man and woman in their community? How would you phrase that these are the people that created the environment that produces little yummies? How do you do that? How do you
see the thing for me is I don't believe that you'll be very successful if you're pointing the finger at other people. I think that a much more successful and better tack would be, let me show you what we can do when we get in there. One is a reactionary, and the other one is somewhat revolutionary. Okay, why do we need to continue to rehash a past that you've already lived, that you're experiencing in this present moment? Let me show you what we could do when we get in there. Period. Show them, show them the attractive part of your political program, not criticism of a pre-existing program that hasn't worked for them. They already know it ain't worked for them. So let me show you what it is that we're going to do, versus being reactionary and in many ways saying, well, they did this and he did this and you got no. Check it out. This is what we're going to do. Okay. And when we get in there, when we get in power, this is what we're going to. Now, if this appeals to you, roll with us.
Sandra brings up a good point, and Brandon Johnson out of Chicago. And his administration has been under attack thoroughly. Some that he caused, and some that probably just came with the territory. Is there a specific, I want to say, behavior or a model that a Black mayor in today's times must be able to use in order to operate effectively? Because I think it was Mayor Coleman, Johnny Coleman, I think was in Cleveland or something like that. He was a real straight talker, brash, he'd be doing interviews and cuss the damn reporter out. What
He was the mayor of Cleveland?
I think so. We had talked about him before. I saw a few videos on him. And no, not Cleveland. I'm sorry, Detroit.
Oh yeah. Mayor Coleman out of Detroit.
So and looking at Brandon Johnson, looking at the super mayor that really should be in jail. I don't understand why she's not in fucking jail, but she needs to go to jail. All the robbing she did. How would you say that the politicians in this era must act like? Is there a certain type that they must follow?
Yeah, I believe that the type that you follow is that you have your agenda. You campaign on that agenda. I mean, it's no different than what your president that you voted for recently, that's in there right now, what he's doing. He told you. He said, "This is what we're doing." Paul Mooney, one of second greatest comic of the 20th century, next to Richard Pryor. Mooney, he had this criticism. He had this riff that he did on George W. Bush. He said, "Yeah. Y'all got a little gangbanger in there now. Okay, doing drive-bys on countries now. Okay, ain't authorized." He went ahead and did the same thing that Trump's doing. You become the mayor. You become the president. You are the head, okay? And you implement your agenda. You don't do what nice guys like Obama do, where he came out and specifically said, "Listen, I'm the president for all Americans." Yeah, that's true, but that doesn't mean that you need to compromise and curtail your agenda that you were elected on. You need to go ahead and implement that and make them respond in their best interest, the same way that we have to respond in our best interest when we have someone in there who cares not about Black folk at all. So I think that you create that agenda and then you do your best to implement it. But let me also sort of temper what I just said with the understanding that the mayor may be the chief politician of a city, but he ain't the only factor in there. If you think about being the mayor of let's say if you're the mayor of Detroit, if you're Coleman Young and you're the mayor of Detroit, and you come into your office and you get a message from GM, from Ford, from all the big automotive dealerships, and they say, "Listen, we're leaving." There's nothing that he can do about that. Okay, that's out of his hands. Now he's going to try and save the day, but by and large, he's not the only big dog in a city. And that's something that's very difficult sometimes for us to say. Now, for things that he's in control of, hold his feet to the fire. Okay, this is what we elected you for. Okay, the brother Brandon Johnson in Chicago. This is what we elected you for. Okay, anything beyond that, hey, we'll give you a pass on that. But these issues that black folk elected you on, that you were supposed to do our bidding, that you were supposed to represent us, become, I tell people, close your eyes and imagine you white, and then do what it is that you know that they would do to somebody who got up in there and didn't do what they had elected them to do. There ain't no need for no long conversation. There ain't even no need for an announcement that next time that you won't be in there. What we need to do is have a voting block that is so strong that quite simply you already know, man, they put me in here on their own. And closely associated with that is the realization that they'll take me out of here on their own. So I better, this is my primary constituency that I need to deal with, really the only one I need to deal with. They need to be beholden to black folk. They need to be beholden to working class and poor folk. I don't believe in a middle class. That's who your elected officials need to be beholden to, not to anyone else.
Wow. And I also want to say welcome to Brother Donald. I forgot that Brother Donald was in until I saw his post. What do I want? Okay. We are beyond our time, but I did want to ask this hypothetical question before we move to closing comments. As we see, we're about to enter into the primary election in New York, and you have the current mayor about to be versus first Muslim mayor versus this Muslim guy who's running, a very liberal type of individual. If Malcolm X was the mayor of New York City, what would he have done? Would you think, Doc? What could he have produced out of New York City?
Wow, if Malcolm that's a question I never even thought about. If Malcolm had been elected the mayor of New York City, first of all, how that's gonna happen when y'all didn't vote until Jesse Jackson? That's a whole nother question. But I believe that Malcolm would have been in many ways very similar to what we would imagine Bernie Sanders, championing the poor and the working class communities on one hand, yet at the exact same time, I believe that Malcolm would have been so demanding upon black folk and implementing what I term socially responsible individualism. He would have, we would have had all these speeches about it. I know you remember the speech where he talks about liquor bottles and the government seal that's on them. He would have called for our people to turn towards Allah, turn towards God, Jesus, whatever your version is, and to be responsible for yourself. Yet at the exact same time, he would have been very staunch and resistive to any excuses for crime, for immorality, and things like that. I believe that he would have made New York, I know he would have made New York safe, because we would have had not only the NYPD out here patrolling, we would have had the FOI out there patrolling Black America up in the projects and things like that, regulating things. So I think it would have been a very good thing for New York City, an excellent thing for New York City. You wouldn't have the trash, you wouldn't have a lot of the dereliction, and you would have had a demand, and I call it the John Smith demand, that a man who does not work does not eat. That there would be a standard expectation that it's an old Communist Party USA mantra, and it is quite simply, to those who what is the mantra that I can't even think of the mantra right now. To each according to his own needs, and from each according to his own abilities. So whatever a society or a city needed, whatever you needed as a citizen, society would provide it to you, but you were also on the hook to make your contribution to society as well. That would be a very great and fascinating thing to even imagine. Brother Malcolm being the president, being the mayor of New York City.
Definitely. So we're going to go ahead and move to closing comments. But one thing I would like for you to address in your closing comments, the crosshair metaphor that we're using is very powerful. It implies being targeted. Did these systems actively target Yummy, or was he a victim of a more passive but equally lethal malignant neglect? So if you can add that into your closing comments.
Okay. Before I lose what it is you just asked, I don't believe that Yummy was necessarily targeted in the sense that someone said, let's get this black child. I believe that he was targeted from a stance of, quite simply, let's get all these black children who are not meeting the standard. So in that way, I would say that he was targeted. Let's be very clear upon this, that when we're talking about the navigation of not only urban but also rural societies for poor people, the more obstacles that are constructed, and these obstacles may not even be aimed at sidetracking an individual person. It's just how their society, in the absence of resources, has laid the playing field. You're going to get a lot of them caught up. And when you think about the profitability of the prison industrial complex, and I'm once again, I'm from a prison town, so I know that a entire town can be supported by just one prison, let alone the 5 that we have in my hometown. So I don't think he was. I think he was targeted in a general sense, but not directly. But it's probable that so many droves of our children are going to get caught up in this type of thing. Most definitely. There's no doubt about it.
Okay. And the only way to escape that net that's casted out for our boys, for our girls, for our people, period, is what? What would you say?
The construction by us of roads. We need to throw up roads to provide them a way out of nowhere, a reliable, sturdy road to get out of the clutches of these monsters who are looking to devour them. They're roaming the earth, like scripture says. They're roaming the earth to see whom they can devour. We need to counteract that, and we need to counterbalance that. And the thing that I look at with the video that you showed earlier is quite simply, why did it take the arrival of the angel of death for Black folk to get together and march together and cooperate together? Where was that solidarity? Where was that unity? Where was that? And we're not talking about necessarily something that has to be big, something that has to be complex, something that is sophisticated. We can create a community center almost without a building. And you'll find you have willing resources who are able to make those things happen. But a lot goes into getting the people ready and the people prepared that this is what it is that we do. These are our values right here. Okay. This is why you go here. Okay. One of the more frustrating things, and we talked about this previously on the show, was when we started a Saturday school. We couldn't get Black folk in the 3rd and 5th ward to bring their children to the school. Now, part of that could be promotion and things like that. I'm not sure what they did on the promotion side of things. However, that needs to be, there needs to be a connection between the rhetorical and the actionable. We'll rhetorically say, well, yeah, what we need is to educate our own. Is it? Well, we had that, and y'all chose to not participate because you had other things you wanted to do on the weekend. So we need to close that loophole. We need to close that gap, so to speak, between what it is that we say we want and what we actually want and are willing to do. So we're talking about the construction of a counterbalance, a counterattack. And the best way to do that is independent Black schools that are educating our children. And to borrow the lexicon and the phraseology of Chuck D from Public Enemy, turn off the radio. And in regards to turn off the radio, turn off the television as well. Our children should not know the names of the Real Housewives or Love and Hip Hop. They shouldn't know that. And I'm not going to say before they shouldn't know that at all. They should not be exposed to that type of behavior. And in the moment that we see Black parents wilding out, I'm an advocate for seizing their children and raising them in a proper way. And we Black folk determine what's proper.
And I got one more question for you, Doc, before we actually go to your closing comments. I forgot about this one. I wanted to get your opinion on this Time cover magazine with Yummy in there.
Yes.
You remember this?
I remember that.
What was your thinking when you first saw it? What was your thinking then, and what's your reflections on it now? The meaning.
It is once again way too little and way too late. Where, it's almost violence porn that outsiders can look into Black America and see what's going on, the death and destruction that's going on within Black America. Okay, you have on the one hand, you have this, and people would say, well, this, this publicity, it would be great for it. Well, what happens after that? Because next week Time is going to have another cover. So I don't see that as being necessarily actionable. I don't see that as being necessarily a positive thing. You're in many ways talking about what happened in this child, and let's call him what he is. He's a child. You're talking about what occurred in this child's life, and more than likely, without the proper historical context, to talk about what has happened, not only in Chicago, what's happened in Milwaukee, what's happened in Detroit, what's happening in Memphis. The list goes on and on and on and on. It's a report. This is what happened. And this is a very abbreviated, a Cliff Note account of why it happened. And you can sit there and you can sympathize, and you can have a few moments where, this is, but once those feelings go, what you got, and really what you have is a fleeting sadness and a determination to go ahead and go forward. If not the idea, if you approach it from the other standpoint of verification that they're super predators.
Wow. Excellent, Doc. All right, Doc, we're going to go ahead and move to closing comments.
All right, gang. This is, once again, it's our second week. We were actually together last week. We did a taping last week. Great to be back. Great to be with my brother again. And we've decided that we're both old. And the idea of going to work and then being able to do something that is worthy of our audience is probably a bridge too far for us, because I'm sure that many of you noticed that this brother did not at all sometimes, and I'm sure that I'm not at all sometimes after working a full day, like we work on Parchment Farm. So we're aiming to do Saturdays, which is a lot freer for both of us, and we look forward to building an audience up and getting to know y'all, and go ahead and in many ways participate as far as putting messages down there for us. Feel free to contact us with show topics, any clips, any snippets that, and anything you want us to cover. Send it to Brother Maurice, and I'm sure that he will get it in. And I love you all, and I'm glad to be back. Peace.
Definitely. Thank you, Doc. And again, I echo that what Doc has just said. Send what y'all got, and we'll definitely work it in there. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for continuing to stay with us for this over almost 2 hours and 30 minutes. We thank you. Actually, to like, share, and subscribe if you have not already subscribed. And as we always say, you kill the nigga in you, I'm going to kill the nigga in me, and our God will reign supreme. We are Black First, today, tomorrow, and forever. Love you, family. Peace and blessings. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom.
So you better get the message and get it straight. You're going to need some bridge work. It's simple as that. Because we're living in judgment. We're living in implementation.